in the deepest night.
So, pretty crazy, huh?
There is nothing left inside of me now. Nothing at all. No hatred, not even regret. And yet sometimes
You'll be fine. Just roll the intro.
I feel the pain creeping up inside me, slithering through my body. Well, now that I've had some time to recover from that, welcome everyone to part 2 of our joint review. Just like before, we have a guest with us.
Hello, everybody. I'm DQP from Refrigerated Reviews.
Now, before we start, as I just said, this is actually the second half of a 2-part video, so if you haven't seen the first part yet, go check it out on DQP's channel. With that in mind, for those of you who watched the other video, you know that in this one, we're going to be talking a bit more in depth about the story aspects of the Phantom Pain, along with diving into some spoiler-heavy territory, so you've been warned there. Alright DQP, since I started us off in the last video, you can do the honors this time.
Will do. So, it's 1984, 9 years after Big Boss is put into his coma, and he's reawakened to find that the hospital he's staying at is being invaded by Cypher. He manages to escape with a mysterious person named Ishmael, and is eventually rescued by Revolver Ocelot. After a pretty exciting chase from the man on fire, Ocelot tells him that Cypher's on the hunt for Big Boss and his men.
And it's not just them. The whole world wants you dead. You'll have to join up with Miller. Build that private army of yours one more time. It's your only chance.
After a small montage of getting back to full strength and a prosthetic, which is a nice nod to the one at Peace Walker, Ocelot takes Snake to Afghanistan to rescue Kaz, who is taken prisoner by a unit led by the mysterious Skullface, the man responsible for the destruction of Mother Base back in Ground Zeroes. From there, it's a game of building the best base with the best members, hunting down Skullface to get revenge for what he's done, and unveiling some of the mysteries that start to unravel from what happened during the time of Ground Zeroes, Peace Walker, and some parts even going as far back as Snake Eater.
As the game progresses, we meet a bunch of familiar characters and new things about said characters. Like for instance, we actually learn the first name of Liquid Snake, Eli. There's a few side missions where you find Paz and try to help put her soul at rest, and hell, we even discover that the man on fire is actually the remains of Colonel Volgan from the third game. Yes, Colonel Volgan actually makes an appearance. And you know who else? It turns out he's being controlled by the power of young Psycho Mantis. Who would have thought he was a ginger, am I right?
They then make contact with Huey Emmerich, who is believed to be responsible for the attack on Mother Base 9 years ago, to try and get more information out of him. Through this, we discover that Skullface is making what could be considered the strongest Metal Gear to date, along with a biological weapon that attacks people based on the language they speak. Shortly after finding out about these parasites, an epidemic starts breaking out on Mother Base, affecting the entire staff. From there, Snake has to rescue the one responsible for creating the parasites, Code Talker.
Through this, we discover that Code Talker extracted the remains of the End's body and modified it to where it would enhance his body by replacing his organs, extending his already unnaturally long lifespan, and even allowing him to eat through photosynthesis. However, after Skullface discovers Code Talker's research on the parasites, he holds his people hostage in the means to turn the parasite into a weapon with the activation of a certain language. The only language for certain that these parasites do not affect is Code Talker's home language, Navajo.
And the main catalyst that was the carrier for the English strain of the parasites? None other than Cypher's silent assassin, Quiet.
Yeah, fun story. For those of you who weren't waiting on the game from the start, there was a lot of talk about how Quiet was a completely optional part of the game, even though having her is a crucial part in getting the final mission so you can unlock the real ending. But we'll get to that part a bit later. Anyway, we find out through a conversation she has with Code Talker that she is only able to speak Navajo without causing a parasite outbreak that'll kill everyone.
Belagana, Gesnita, Katobe Yasteta, Asetota.
But more on her in a bit. So Code Talker gives Snake something that helps stop the parasites from breeding, thus preventing the outbreak at Mother Base, and from there it's a battle against Skullface and Metal Gear Sahelanthropus.
So one murderous rampage later, Skullface is dead, Sahelanthropus is taken back to Mother Base, and everything seems right with the world again. only to discover that there was more after this, pulling the exact same trick they did with us back in Peace Walker.
One thing we didn't really mention was how throughout the course of the game there was also a unit of child soldiers, being led by the man who would grow up to become Liquid Snake, Eli. One reason we didn't bring it up? Well, we'll get to that later.
Sometime after Skullface's death, Ocelot discovers that Huey's work on the quarantine platform at Mother Base causes a strand of mutated parasites that work almost like how the cordyceps would work. And that being that the parasites would infect the host, wanting them to run outside to be eaten alive by the birds, where they would spread to the birds and infect new hosts through the air. But instead of affecting snails or ants, they start affecting your staff at Mother Base. So to prevent an outbreak, Snake has to put down over 40 of his own men.
As you could probably guess, this doesn't really sit well with Mother Base. Miller and the others want him executed, but Big Boss, in a moment of mercy and attempt at a happy medium, decides to spare his life, and exiles him off of Mother Base.
Shortly after the discovery of the mutated strand, Quiet disappears and runs off to the Middle East, leaving Big Boss in charge of tracking her down. After he finds her, and after an agonizingly long firefight, he manages to get to Quiet, but due to the sandstorm, he has to get around on foot. He gets bit by a snake while waiting for a rescue chopper and is unable to give any communication.
At this point, Quiet makes the ultimate sacrifice to contact Mother Base and help them find where they are.
The boss is with me.
AM? Wait, who is this? Identify yourself!
There's no time. Hurry!
Only for Big Boss to wake up and see she's nowhere to be found.
I did not choose to be quiet. I wanted to express my feelings to you. If only we shared a common tongue.
Vengeance was what drove me to them. The only language left to me, revenge. But the words we shared, no, that was no language at all. That is why I chose the language of gratitude instead, and go back to silence. I am quiet. I am the absence of words.
So this leads us into hidden mission number 46, as well as the most spoiler-heavy part of the game. If you haven't completed the game yet, exit out of the video right now, unless you want to get spoiled on this. Alright, last warning, here we go. It's not the real Big Boss.
We were already pretty spoiler-heavy, Jack. Alright, anyway. Our Venom Snake is actually the medic who helped remove one of Paz's bombs in Ground Zeroes, which, if you pay attention to the credits at the end of Ground Zeroes, is also voiced by Kiefer Sutherland.
No time for anesthetic. We have to open her now.
At the beginning, they give you the option to customize your character into some kind of avatar, and it leads you into thinking it's disguising you, but it was actually being used to disguise the real Big Boss, and you were being made to look like him. You know, it's pretty funny, because if you listen carefully, it opens up with David Bowie's song The Man Who Sold the World, covered by Midge Ure, and the lyrics foreshadow it from the very beginning.
His friend, which came as some surprise. I spoke into his eyes. I thought you died alone a long, long time ago. Oh.
That's a trick only Kojima himself could pull off. I'll admit I made my avatar look a little bit similar to Big Boss, so this was especially surprising for me because I didn't notice much of a difference when I initially started.
As far as Phantom Pain's story goes, it's a pretty good wrap-up to everything in the timeline, as it does tie the last knot between the Big Boss saga and Solid Snakes. But there is one problem, and as I mentioned back in my video, it's kind of a big one.
In our last video, we discussed how a majority of the lore hidden in this game is shoved into these numerous cassette tapes that you have to listen to in order to make progress. Remember those epic lines that were featured in all the trailers, like Ocelot talking about Skullface or Kotaker talking about the power of language? Yeah, a good majority of those are packed into those cassette tapes. Although to be fair, it does give you something to listen to when you're traversing the big landscapes. Is it that bad? Probably not, but for Metal Gear Solid's bar that it's set for storytelling, it just seems like a waste of potential.
Like, after you complete the true ending, you unlock a bunch of secret recorded tapes of Zero interacting with all the members of Mother Base. That's nice, but wouldn't it have been so much better to see him speaking with everyone rather than just hearing the voices? There's another recording between Code Talker and Skullface as he tries to get information out of him for how to stop the parasites from infecting everyone. Again, it probably would have been a lot more entertaining to actually see it happen rather than hear them talking.
Although that's not to say it never works in its favor. Remember that side mission with Paz? For each new picture that you send her, you also unlock new tapes of her slowly recollecting the events that happened in her life. You slowly start coming to the grips with the fact that she's really gone, and she's doing so right alongside you.
Peace Day never came. Every morning I wake up expecting it to come, but it is always 3 days away. That cannot be it. I have not woken up at all. With 3 days left, I followed my orders from Cypher and launched the operation. I hijacked Zeke. I fought Snake. I lost and was thrown into the ocean. I survived, but I was captured by Cypher. You have figured it out now. You can kill Skullface, murder Huey, slaughter Zero, burn the whole world down, and it still won't bring me back. Me, or any of the dead.
Here, it works because it's something that's actually taking place in Big Boss's head, rather than an event that was actually happening. In another, we get to hear the last words of Dr. Strangelove, who through an assisted suicide from Huey, locked herself in the boss's AI pod.
Well, I guess I'll stay a while. My voice, it's so distant. But you can hear me, can't you, Joy? I know you can.
It's one of the hardest recordings to get through in the game just because of how heartbreaking it was. And it works because it's a slow, intimate farewell to a character who gained so much popularity during her debut in Peace Walker.
And, we can't really blame Kojima entirely on this, as there was a lot of development hell that went through in making this. But we already talked about this during the last part. Even though the story was told in a subpar way, I did still like it, and there were moments that I thoroughly enjoyed. Especially the one that tied into base management, where you have to kill everybody off with the Kikongo strain. And aside from Snake, I really liked all the other characters thus far, especially Skullface and his unit. They were all incredibly creepy and had their own interesting backstories and motivations, with a villainous plan that is simultaneously intriguing, unique, and just the right amount of cheesy. He's not quite as iconic as Liquid or Volgan or GW, but I gotta give credit where it's due. He did put up a pretty interesting performance, even if that conversation in Mission 30 was, well, incredibly one-sided.
To be fair, I think the real Big Boss would have had more to say. And speaking of which, another good thing to mention in this game is the performances. I'll admit I was a little bit skeptical when I first heard some of the new talent in this game. Not Kiefer Sutherland though, I thought he did okay. I was more concerned about Troy Baker playing the new Revolver Ocelot. I noticed he's been appearing in a lot more games lately, and I thought it was just going to be another standard performance. But after seeing his interviews talking about the character and actually watching him play Ocelot in the game, I think he hits the mark perfectly.
Now go! Let the legend come back to life.
He's really come into his own as a voice actor and makes a great transition voice between Josh Keaton's young Ocelot and Patrick Zimmerman's adult Ocelot.
Pretty good. Pretty good.
You're pretty good.
Really? I actually disagree. I'm not discounting Troy Baker's talent at all. He's one of the best VOs in the business by far. But I'm actually not a fan of his more subdued interpretation. It doesn't really quite fit Ocelot's character. In the beginning of the MGS timeline, we had Josh Keaton with a cocky, show-offy demeanor, which was incredibly memorable. We saw through MGS 1 through 4 that he grew into someone who, while being just as cocky, was still cool and calculating. That's what makes him such an appealing villain. He was constantly pulling the strings, and his charisma always showed it. I'm having a hard time believing that the Ocelot we see helping Venom assemble Diamond Dogs is the same Ocelot that, well, does this.
Bang!
And yeah, I know they explain it with self-hypnosis or whatever, but come on, that's just a cop-out.
True, but one thing we need to consider is the respect Ocelot holds for Big Boss versus what he holds for Solid Snake, especially in the way he teaches the soldiers. Did you notice he did it the exact same way that Big Boss taught him the first day they met?
That's an automatic. Don't bother trying to dampen the recoil. You do that with a revolver.
Not to mention how at the end Miller and Ocelot were both talking about how he'll eventually be going against one of Big Boss's sons. And in that regard, I still see it as a pretty fluid transition. Plus, I actually like how they start fleshing out just what kind of a sadist he is. I thought it was cool to actually see him do some real interrogation. Have you noticed throughout the entire series, even though it's in his job description, we've only seen Ocelot do real interrogation once? Although you are right about one thing, there's definitely some inconsistency in the character in between games. And that's something I think Kiefer Sutherland has going for him as Snake.
Ah yes, and let's not forget about Kiefer Sutherland. In terms of how he sounded, he was a great transition from David Hayter to Richard Doyle. When he actually talked, and unfortunately that's where my problem with him lies. He speaks so little during the main events of the story that he's practically a silent protagonist. I wanted to give him a chance as Hayter's replacement, but there's only so much battle grunts and Dee coddling I can listen to without hearing his actual interaction in the story.
And one last performance that I think is also worth noting is Pierre Stubbs as Eli, because, well, yeah, I think it's a good performance. I have no trouble believing this guy would grow up to become Liquid Snake.
I told them, last chance to face the world with no regrets.
Last chance?
You better be ready for your drag back here. Ready to face the world as enemies.
No!
It's almost a spot-on match, right down to the inflections.
While we're on the topic of Liquid Snake, let's get back to that side story we briefly touched on. After you bring Eli back to Mother Base, we find out that he's slowly been trying to stage a coup with the other child soldiers you rescue. He ends up hijacking Sahelanthropus with the help of Psycho Mantis and flies off to Africa, and that's it! There's actually a cut mission in the game's code that would have had Venom and Diamond Dogs go to confront Eli on his Island of the Flies, which, by the way, is mentioned in the final game's credits. And to think, the reason we put this on the back burner is likely due to Konami's recent machinations.
Yeah, and from the looks of it, it doesn't look like it's going to be coming back in. It chronicles Big Boss going after Eli to get Sahelanthropus back along with the child soldiers. Long story short, he succeeds, but Eli escapes the island with Psycho Mantis before it's torched with napalm. Is that the right term for it? Torched with napalm? I don't know.
Anyway, it's unfortunate that it was removed, because I think it would have provided the closure that fans really want. But on the plus side, the rough draft did make it into the collector's edition disc for the game, and it can be seen on that. But, that's just no excuse.
I unfortunately wasn't able to get that version in time, so what you're seeing is just what we could find on the internet. But search the Kingdom of the Flies mission on YouTube, and you should be able to find it no problem.
We may be talking all over the place for this game, but there's just so much to talk about. Overall, I feel pretty satisfied with this. It's not the perfect ending, even with the cut mission taken into account. It answers plenty of existing questions without really feeling like the true missing link we were promised in the trailers. It's hard not to feel like the story was an afterthought this time, with the majority of it being mostly optional. Still, it does give closure to many of the existing characters in the prequel games. Especially Zero. His tapes at the end make his transition from helpful mission control to AI creating villain more believable. And I can't deny that the twist is actually a pretty creative way to preserve the Big Boss legacy. Kojima pulled another MGS2 with this game's ending, but with the more hopeful message that the Big Boss legacy isn't quite as tarnished as we thought it was from his supposed actions in the first MSX2 game. And as someone who is expecting Big Boss's start into darkness, I really didn't see that coming.
It also does a great job at answering a huge plot hole in the very first Metal Gear for the NES, being, why would Big Boss send Solid Snake on a mission to take down an organization led by Big Boss? And not only that, it's a great send-off to everything we know and love about the series, everything it was and has evolved into over the time it's been around. If they never make another game in the Metal Gear series again, I think I would be okay with that. Because everything seems to have finally come full circle. Is it the best game ever? No. Is it the best Metal Gear Solid ever? Definitely not. But it's the perfect wrap-up to everything that we needed. All loose ends tied up and all questions answered. Kojima's created a legacy that the world has never seen before and probably won't ever see again for a long time. Kojima, we'd both like to personally thank you for all that you've given us over the past 25 years, and we hope that you find work again in the near future. So in hopes of continuing your genius, we'd like to end this in saying,
Here's to you, boss.
Hey guys, thanks for watching my first ever crossover video. If you want to check out DQP's other stuff, he's currently in the middle of doing a great backlog offensive and just recently put out a video on another great Konami game, Silent Hill 2. So if you want, check it out. He does it way better justice than when I touched on it in my favorite games list.
Actually, with game releases in full swing again, it's time to momentarily forget the backlog and plug in that old fridge again. With that, I'll be putting out content way more consistently than Jack does on his channel, so even if Silent Hill 2 isn't to your liking, there's more to check out.
Wow, really? Anyway, so if you're new to my channel, why don't you go check out some of my other videos, like this last video I did where I was talking about the real-life signs about how Liquid and Solid Snake were cloned. I had a lot of fun with it, and I definitely encourage you to check it out. So, thanks for watching, and before we go, I want to try something different ending this video. So to start things off, who here likes kids? Wow, so it's that kind of audience, huh? Well then, who here likes playing video games for a good cause? Well, DQP and I are both going to be participating in an event called Extra Life Gaming, a charity event which helps raise money for the local children's hospitals by sponsoring people who play video games. It's like a telethon, except with more streaming and gaming.
But of course.
And I'm going to be doing a bunch of live streaming on different games on Twitch. I'll be streaming games like Destiny, Arkham Knight, Phantom Pain, hell, I might even get my feet wet and finally start playing Assassin's Creed. The charity event will be starting Friday, October 16th, 5 p.m. Alaska time. I'll be posting links on Facebook and YouTube to check out our stream, so come on by, watch us game, and donate to our charity. You can send a donation to either me or DQP to help raise money in our area, or heck, even find a group in your area and donate to them. If everything goes well stream-wise, I'll see about putting together a highlight reel and show it later down the line. If you want to check that out, don't forget to subscribe and you won't miss the highlight reel or the next episode of A Jack of All Trades. So until then, I'll see you guys in the next video. My name is Jack, and that was my trade. Later.